Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. My name is Jared Budlong. I'm running as an independent candidate for governor here in Alabama, and tonight is Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central-ish, and we are having a policy meeting. If you haven't seen one of these before, we do things a little bit differently on our campaign. We do everything as openly and transparently as possible. That includes our policy meetings, our strategy meetings. Probably going to shift those to operations team. You just found that out. And then the field operations. I don't want to have them back to back operations, but we got to figure out a better name because strategy isn't it. We have to do other things also. Anyway, those are on Saturday from 9 to 10 and 10 to 11 currently. And if you schedule a meeting with me, I prefer those to be public as well. So if you want to talk to me, preferably publicly, so people know what we're talking about. If it has to be private because you have things that you can't share publicly, that's okay. We can do that also. And everything else, including finance reports, public. I mean, they're public anyway, but I literally post mine to my website because I'm not here to hide anything from you. I think government shouldn't attempt to hide any little bit from you. So that's where I'm at. And tonight we have a special guest. Michael has agreed to join us. He sent in some feedback to our feedback form, and I thought it was some really good insight into some potential policy ideas for education. And instead of trying to make sense of those privately and back and forth through an email, I said, you know what, it would make a lot more sense for you to just jump onto the policy meeting coming up and, give us that feedback. We can ask as a team live as we go. And if there's any questions from anybody watching through social media, so if you're watching here on any of these platforms or you're watching on TikTok, use the comments here and use the Q&A feature on TikTok so we can try to keep track of those and answer them if they're relevant. Try to keep those on topic. Amanda's here in the comments. Cool. So, Michael, I'll let you start off, and you can kind of, give a recap of what you said in the feedback form, and then dive into as much detail as you want about those, because I would love to know kind of where you're coming from, and also kind of how you came to those conclusions, right? So, I'll let you have the floor, and if we have questions, we'll jump in.
Okay. Sorry. My throat's sore or whatever, and I just finished eating, so
that's all right.
Ignore the cost, please. The thing I was mentioning is the fact that not every school in Alabama is required to have all of these things. Every school has state minimums based off of student numbers that give teachers. There's a percent adjustment for special ed teachers, which does almost nothing effectively at a school level. They're required now for a mental health coordinator for districts, but no one requires an actual mental health counselor. And EL students are not always served properly because there's not a required EL teacher at any school.
And EL is English as a second language type situation?
English language development. So yeah, what most people consider ESL. It's just an outdated term. The state of Alabama currently uses the term EL for English learner, and it's shifting with the WITA consortium, which is how Alabama gets its policies, as they shift to multi-language or multilingual learners, since many kids, especially out of southern Mexico and Central America, come to the U.S. speaking a native language, Spanish, and then they're learning English. Just English is not the second language. It's usually the third, the fourth.
Gotcha.
Something.
So EL is the more up-to-date term?
EL is currently the more up-to-date term.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, I will try to shift my language then.
Okay. Cat. Sorry.
No, it's okay. You're good.
You will see us anytime I'm on my camera.
I live that life. Oh, cat butt.
Yeah. Yep.
That's why I was late. I have kittens.
Okay. This cat decides he has to be in it. But as well, there is really no minimum for paraprofessionals in the state of Alabama, which are people who have like an associate's degree in child development or education, or a partially finished their bachelor's and are working towards getting a teaching degree. Just as there's no set firm divisors that mean so many number of students and you get a special ed teacher that has to be there and it's funded out of Alabama's foundation units, which are their core.
Okay.
Like currently, for every 14.25 kids or something like that, you get a teacher for kindergarten through third grade. The numbers increase drastically when you get fourth through sixth grade. It goes from like 14. I just want to make certain I have it right where I put it. So I am looking.
So you can
'cause I don't,
you can ballpark for this one. It's okay. We'll have we can get the actual
yeah.
references and everything, but you can ballpark. It's okay.
But it's like, I want to say it goes up to like almost 20, and then it drops down a little bit. It used to be 6th through 8th grade was the lowest or highest percentage of students, and it's dropped down now slightly for middle school, and drops again to like 17 or 18 at the high school level.
And when you say the highest percentage, meaning the highest percentage of students to teacher, meaning there's more students per teacher?
There's more students per teacher.
Okay, just making sure I'm clear.
Yeah, looking at exactly, it's 14.25 for K3, 20.43 for 4 through 6, 19.7 for 7th through 8th grade, 17.95 for high school.
Okay.
And all best practices in education will tell you the smaller your student teacher ratios are, the better. Most districts, if they do not have a lot of local funds, which means there's not a lot of local tax revenue in the county or city, which often ends up being your rural systems, like Greene County, Pickens County. If they're awarded 19.68 teacher units, they will have 19 units, 19 teachers working, because they won't have the funds to get paid for that extra partial.
Yeah.
But like special ed they add like an extra 9.8% to your student population to help you try and figure out numbers. Well, unless you have about 800 students, that does nothing. At 800 students, you will get an additional teacher that you can use, but you're not required to have a special ed teacher. There is nothing for EL students, period. The way it's funded, the state gives schools, districts an extra $440 to use for the district, however they wish, pretty much, for every EL student. But to get a teacher, a district is going to pay close to around $86,000 for a teacher with a bachelor's degree straight out of college.
Right.
Just for the cost of the teacher, cost of the benefits, insurance on the workers. So they have no one. And best practice special ed is stating you shouldn't have more than one special ed teacher per 15 to 20 students, period. And like I can tell you from working with students for, this will be my coming 18th year in schools. Cal, hold on.
So there's a question on TikTok, and I'm not sure if it's addressed at me or at Michael. So I want to read it out. Thoughts on AEA requirement for teaching in Alabama?
Okay, there is no AEA requirement. AEA is an organization. It's optional.
Okay.
They have it for teachers. They also have it for paraprofessionals, nurses, anyone else that works in a school. Teachers and administrators pay more for any sort of membership. And then paraprofessional school nurses who get paid next to nothing pay a much lower reduced rate. Like a teacher is going to pay close to about $35 a month. Paraprofessional, the school receptionist, bookkeeper, the lunchroom ladies, or the custodian will pay like $6 a month.
So what is that organization? What is the proposed benefit of that organization, and what is the what is the reason we don't use them currently, if we have an answer?
The reason people will end up joining AEA, is it provides professional insurance, same as a doctor, same as a lawyer. You have a professional liability insurance, they provide that. They also work as a mediator between teachers and administration or the central office. So if something goes up and happens, you've got someone that can speak for you as a third-party agent.
Okay.
Many administrators in Alabama are members of AEA. They're also members of what's called CLAS, which is a professional organization, same thing, but just for administrators.
Okay.
Like you have a principal or assistant principal. So
you mentioned something, and that's maybe that's naivete. Professional insurance for a teacher. What is that for? Like I'm not sure. I can't think of a thing that you would need that for as a teacher.
If someone said I wasn't providing proper services for a special ed student, or I wasn't providing proper instruction and grading for a kid who's an EL student, and I'm not accounting for their language level, then I can be sued for negligence.
Personally, not the school itself.
Yeah, not school itself.
Okay.
It's got to, if I'm doing it outside of school policy, board and school policy, it's always on me. If I'm within school district policies, then if it's something like special education or any general educational rights, then it falls under the school system. But anything dealing with language and acquisition to learning is personal. Also, if a teacher said, or a parent said, I wasn't watching their child at a football game as the coach and paying enough attention, child got hurt, they felt it was my fault and not the school's fault, then the coach could be sued. And that's where that professional liability comes in. Okay. So it's for things outside of a regular school day.
Gotcha.
Usually. But no one requires it. Everyone's upset with AEA because they will use a lot of their funds for trying to sit there and pay people, pretty much education lobbyists, to try and promote education in Alabama. Obviously, what they're doing doesn't work because we're always in the bottom 5.
Right.
So I don't know what their complaints for lobbying are, because they're told no, and that state's done completely the opposite pretty much every time.
Yeah. So what would be, outside of the insurance piece, because this is going to take a slightly weird turn, and if we need to do this after you go through the rest, we can. But a lot of what you're mentioning sounds close to a union outside of maybe the insurance piece.
Yeah.
And like what would be, and I know we don't, our state kind of frowns upon unions in a lot of places.
Yeah.
What would be the difference outside of the insurance between that and a union?
Yeah.
Do you have any?
A union can require its members to go on strike. In Alabama, it is illegal to have a functioning teacher union. That's in the Alabama law. It's in our Constitution.
It's in the Constitution or in the state code? Do you know?
I want to say I know it's in the state code, and I think it almost made it into the actual Constitution.
It wouldn't surprise me. I'm just curious because it's really hard to keep track of that with nearly 400,000 words in the Constitution. So
yeah. But so teachers can't be a member of an actual union. there are teachers in some districts that are members of the American Federation of Teachers, which is an actual union, but in Alabama, they cannot function as a union and would be a legal organization.
Okay.
Just as that's why you don't ever see in Alabama a teacher union AEA strike, because that's not legal. It's not possible.
Well, it's interesting side note, and we'll move on quickly, but there's some various guidelines for declaring a state of emergency in the state of Alabama. One of the few things that they explicitly state you can't, as a governor, claim a state of emergency is around labor disputes.
Right.
So, you know, everything else is pretty much fair game, but labor disputes, they're like, ooh, nope, don't do that. Everything else is fine, but don't do that. So it wouldn't be surprising if it was in the Constitution. It's all I was getting at. So, so earlier we were talking about student to teacher ratios, and I've heard something, and I have not found a way to find this, but they're supposedly the student to teacher ratio can be fudged by counting non-teachers. Is that an official way that's done, or is that literally a fudging of the numbers?
That's fudging of numbers, as far as I know. Like, if you are a teacher, you're in that ratio. You can use local funds to add teachers. You can use federal funds to add more teachers. But you've got small systems that don't have, and they might have to use all their federal funds just to use one additional teacher for their entire building. Yeah,
this was something like saying that custodial workers or administrative staff was somehow being counted in as a part of the teacher count, even though they're not literally working with teachers. But if that's happening, it's not the correct way that should be done. At least it shouldn't be anyway, but it's not officially a way that Alabama allows that. Okay.
Right. Alabama has a ratio, like for so many students, you get a custodian. For so many students, you have a principal, which is one. For so many students, you get assistant principals depending on the body. Like you have to have 250 students, and you can have half of an assistant principal unit. So in theory, you could have a teacher teach for half a day, and as the assistant principal, the other half of the day, which very few districts do. So most of these small ones, well, maybe some larger ones will, but you then have districts that have to use their small little bits of money they have, where they will pay for half of the assistant principal position. So that's completely covered, and they keep the teacher, and then they just have an assistant principal. And they won't have another one until they hit, like, I think it's 550 or 500 students. Will get you an entire assistant principal and principal themselves.
Right.
So that could be kind of how some people might view fudging in numbers.
Gotcha.
Just like you've got to have, I think, 700 students almost to have 2 counselors. For 2 school counselors for a building.
For 700 people.
For 700 people.
Sorry, 700 students. That's not 700 total head count. That's just students.
That's just students. And then nationally, if you look at the American School Counselor Associations and the National Counseling Associations, when they list numbers, their best practice is telling you it should be no more than 1 school counselor per 200 students, because you're not having all the students constantly in there.
Right.
Out of those 200, you might have 30 or 40 that are often needing to see them for help. And so it's a manageable case number for a counselor. But Alabama just doesn't want to listen to best practices from national organizations. Just like I was saying, if you need for teachers to have help, there's nothing for paraprofessionals really. That is up to how the central office and district wants to use a paraprofessional and pay for them.
So you're saying there's no requirement at a state level is what you're getting at. Gotcha. Okay.
And the funds the school will use for that is operation and management. That's the same funding source they have to use to pay for gas on the buses, pay for upkeep on buses, pay for the light bill, pay for their water. The school uses natural gas for cooking, same thing. Any utility function, that's all the same budget. That's school system uses as people.
As people. Yeah.
Which to me is just a slap in the face to a paraprofessional.
Yeah.
And then they pay them so little. I think it breaks down to like $8 an hour.
It's above minimum wage.
Barely.
Sarcasm.
Yeah.
I mean, it is above minimum wage, but
yeah.
That is not a positive thing for the record, because this is
Like,
recorded.
like for the record, I can say a bus driver gets paid great hourly rate. It's like $22 an hour.
Yeah.
But they only work like 4 hours a day.
Right. And the ones that I know that have done bus driving in the past, and if anybody on the call wants to chime in with personal experience, you can. But the ones that I've known in the past have done it. A lot of it's for the state insurance. Like they do it as a part-time thing. They don't really care about the cash per se, but it's you get the state health insurance, which is what the people I've known personally have done. But
It's also good for parents.
Yeah.
Like single parents, you can make enough to get by if you have family support. But a lot of it is like single moms who have a good support system.
Okay.
Yeah, some extra.
Like I just know that you would never, that you're never gonna pay me enough to bus around 40 kids twice a day, early in the morning, in the afternoon. You can't pay me enough.
Yeah. I take that back. There is one person that I know who does it, I think, just because she loves those kids. And I've known her for a very long time. She was one of my teachers when I was in school, and she is still doing it. So outside of that, everybody else has done it for insurance purposes. So if that person is watching, I see you, and I was not trying to say you're doing it for the money and for the insurance, because that person's already a teacher, so they would have the insurance anyway. So anyway, so the budget piece, and I'm probably going to sidetrack it slightly, but the way the units get decided has always baffled me, because I can't understand the math behind it. Are you familiar with how that works out and how they translate heads to units?
Like they will count, you start the Tuesday after Labor Day, and you get the next 30 days. Every day a school has to count their units, has to have 95% or better attendance, or else they docked for numbers. And then it takes the average of that student head count for those 30 days after Labor Day.
Okay.
That's the number of units they will then have for teachers for the next school year. So it's always a year behind.
So I guess where the paper that I was reading was researching alternative ways to decide how much funding should go to each school. And the paper I was reading was written by a professor who's now deceased, but out of Auburn in like 2017. And the way she broke it down in the paper, though, was that the unit number isn't a direct student to unit, like,
it's not a ratio.
Yeah, it's some weird math problem. Is that something you understand or can point me to a place that kind of explains it? Because I have not been able to wrap my head around it.
The way it works, let's say you've got, I don't know, 30 teachers.
Yeah, and we understand that this is live and you're ballparking. It's okay.
I'm ballparking. Yeah. I'm just trying to make up a number here.
Yeah.
I've got 30 teachers. Of those 30 teachers, that's to cover 4 grades.
Okay.
I'm going to have a teacher that's doing math, English, science, social studies for each class, each grade. So that right there is 16 teachers of those 30. I've used half of them just to have one teacher per subject.
Okay.
If I want to have PE with them, if I don't have at least 2 PE teachers, and even that's really short, because that's saying you're going to have PE classes for like 80 kids per class. These kids are 50 to 80 kids per class. So if I take 2 PE teachers, I'm up to 18 units I've used. Then I have to look at, do I have special ed teachers? Well, if I try and have a special ed teacher for every grade, I'm at 22. I've got kids that have severe disabilities, severe needs. They are severely intellectually disabled, have severe autism, anything like that. Well, that's another teacher. So I'm at 23. If I'm looking at something that's 30, I may or may not actually have the units to have a librarian. So add a librarian, and that's 24.
Okay.
I've yet to ever touch electives.
Right.
Like, then I've got to look at the fact that school, if I'm doing 4 grades for that, I know I'm not going to have enough students that will get me into a principal position. But that's too many kids for a principal to work out. So I'm down another one. So I've used 25 students or 25 teachers for that. Alabama now requires that you have intervention services for K through 6. So I'm at another teacher. I'm at 26 students or 26 teachers of my 30. Students need band. If they're in middle school or middle school, you usually have to have a band teacher to build a high school band program. So that's 27. You're required to teach computer science classes for all secondary levels. Preferably, there should be someone teaching it now, kindergarten through, as the digital literacy components required. So that's 28. That's left me 2 teachers I could kind of float around or figure out what I want to do. But, you know, if I try to do art, well, secondary and elementary can't have the same. Elementary level is required 30 minutes a week.
Okay.
But a secondary class has to have 1,080 hours for the school year. Or something like, no, 100. It breaks down like 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week for the school year. So I don't even remember the hour number. I just remember what it breaks down to. So like if I try to do an art teacher, if I do it for high school, secondary levels, like 7th grade and up, that person won't have the time with them that they would need for like an elementary school. So I'd be like 2 different bodies for one thing.
Gotcha.
I'm also not counting a gifted teacher, because gifted kids, or gifted and talented is now called, or gate or tag, either way it goes backwards, forwards. Excuse me, but that's one. So like I'm at 29, but I've only really barely touched anything. And then, you know, if you need at-risk education, that's a student or that's a teacher.
Yeah.
If you need an ESL teacher in there, well, that's a teacher unit. If you're saying you've got kids struggling in math, well, I've got an intervention teacher. Usually that's reading. Now I have another one that's math. These students don't have an elective. Their only elective is they can take band or they can learn the digital literacy that they need.
Yeah.
I didn't even get the option to say choir because that person's just not there.
Yeah, you don't have the head count. So
right.
Something came up. In the questions. Save Birmingham Public Libraries. I see you. Shout out if you live in the Birmingham area, go check out Save Birmingham Public Libraries. They're frustrated with the extreme cuts that have happened to the public library system in Birmingham in the last couple of years. So please go check them out. But there's a question about whether or not the 2022 ACAP results can be cross-referenced with the student-teacher ratio. Does that make sense to you?
As what they're looking for, the ACAP, which is what you said ACAP. Most people in education call it ACAP.
I wanted to make sure the letters came through because of internet.
Right.
I didn't want it to sound like another word or anything else. So
right. What they're doing with that is they release those in like end of August, early to mid-August is when it get released in public. But all that's going to tell you is how your student did in math, reading, and the years they test for science, because it's not every year that tests for science. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, and that's it. Next time they'll test science is on the ACT. But that doesn't translate anywhere for teacher units.
Oh, go ahead.
If a school doesn't perform high enough with enough kids being proficient or above proficiency, then that school is required to do some sort of intervention for every child that doesn't meet those requirements. And that means that you've got teachers who are secondary science teachers or secondary English teachers having to sometimes go back and try to figure out how to teach a kid who's in 9th grade on a 2nd grade reading level. What the state did was pass the Literacy Act, where if they take a subscore of their ACAP or ACAP, because you want to make certain letters go through.
Well, everybody knows we're on the same page. It's fine. You can say it at this point. I want to make sure you knew what I was saying.
Okay. So if those scores aren't high enough now, as of next year, because I think they only delayed for a year, then those kids repeat that grade.
Okay.
So they don't add any extra teachers. That just means now one grade is overloaded with students. I think it's 3rd grade is overloaded with. I've never had to teach real little, so I can't remember if it's 2nd or 3rd, but that grade's overloaded, and hopefully they can clear out. But if they all clear out, then that 4th grade's overloaded, and now they've got an extra. So it has its place, but with the way funding goes for education, there's just not enough bodies. And then we have the media that's pretty much made certain media and social media between the stories that always get pushed. If there's a problem in society at this point, it's because of teachers. So then you've got teacher burnout and you can't get enough teachers. They found increased pay helps to retain teachers who are already in the system. But even if I started,
it doesn't entice people.
No, if you told me I was going to make $40,000 a year, and let's look back when COVID first started. The teachers going and working with students online were amazing, and they're heroes, and they're great, and they're awesome. But they talk about the fact that COVID was still going, and it wasn't safe to be in school still. And now they're again back to being lazy and money hungry, and they're just in it for the summer breaks. And now the teachers are the villain. So to be the villain of society across the board, it doesn't matter left side or right, politically, you couldn't pay me enough to do that for $40,000 to start.
Right.
And then in Alabama, no, I've got to teach till I'm 62.
You've got before to teach what?
I would have to teach till I'm 62. Like with tier 2, it's now you have to teach for 30 years before you can get retirement.
Okay.
Any teacher hired after 2013.
Gotcha.
Or as of 2013. But I've got to teach 30 years, but I can't draw my retirement check till I'm 62.
I also think one thing that teachers in specifically Alabama have to battle is, and I've heard this with some of my family members, is Common Core. The phrase Common Core is the boogeyman. And teachers get the brunt of people's distaste for Common Core. Like, that people hate Common Core with such ferocity that I've seen them take it out on the teachers, family members and stuff. So,
and Alabama never taught Common Core. That was a set of standards. Alabama used the core ideas of them to make a college and career readiness system, which they also used based off of what all the major businesses were asking. The difference everyone hates is not the reading portion, it's not the science portion, it's not the social studies portion. Well,
Yeah.
Uh, overall, it's not because of, as people learn more about our past instead of our propaganda,
Yeah.
then they start having
Certain
it's not
demographics
certain-
have a problem with
certain
history
yes.
being taught accurately. Yeah.
but it's the math portion, because what we're doing with college career readiness is the same thing Common Core is doing, which is the same thing that math educational research has shown, brain development research has shown. All of these sciences have gotten better about how the brain works. Is if you teach number sense, why you do this, and that people understand the why well enough,
Right.
then they understand what they're doing. So when they get it wrong, they can kind of figure it out.
Right.
What people who are in their late 30s and on, we were all
Memorization.
taught algorithms. You cross multiply, then divide to do proportions. Why? That's just what you do.
Right.
That's what you're told to do. That's the way you do it. It works. And then you had to go and take a 300 level mathematics course for the theory of numbers to now, which is a course with what they're teaching you why we did all these algorithms, how they came up. And instead, now we're teaching that same number sense in small bits and pieces starting in like kindergarten.
Right.
But everyone's like, oh my God.
Yeah, the thing that I've seen most people, and it's slightly off track, but the thing that I've seen most people complain about is just how it doesn't line up with how they know how to do math, so they think it's broken, and it's like,
Right.
but it's not. Like you remember that because that's how you were taught it, but like I don't do math that way. Like I very much so resonate with the way that math is been taught, at least to some of my kids. For the most part, there's a couple times where it's like, this doesn't make any sense, but like the way they're teaching you to chunk out numbers, for instance, let's say it's math, and they're like, hey, what is 25 plus 72, and they're like, kind of like, what is 20 plus 70, and then add the others together, and it just makes sense. That's how my brain worked in the first place. It was never stack them up and like do the math that you would do on paper in your head. Like that never worked for me, and some people
Right.
find it weird, and it's like, that's just how my brain works. So like,
Well,
I think this is great.
Yeah, I think I was gonna say, like, having ADHD, you can figure things out in a different way, and I think it's really important, great thing to show neurotypical kids and ADHD kids, hey, look, you can figure out the answer using a variety of methods. They're all, if you get the right answer, they're all correct. Let's learn, all the ways.
Yeah, as long
Right.
as the path was right. Like there's
Right.
a possibility you got there on accident, and that's a different problem, but that's not what they're teaching. But that's what people think, is like they think they're teaching some shenanigans, and it's like, no, it actually
Right.
does make sense. You just don't understand.
I can
Uh,
barely get the
and,
right answer on purpose,
like,
much less on
I can,
accident.
yeah,
I want to.
I can tell you.
Somebody
working
asked
with-
on Facebook what's happening. We're having a policy meeting, Keith. Thank you for jumping in. Somebody tagged you. I'm running for governor, and we're having a policy meeting, and we're meeting with Michael to talk about education policy, and specifically, right now we're talking about the Common Core principles. But we're gonna jump back on track. I want, before we get too far or too close to the end, I still am not fully grasping how we get from X number of students that are in attendance in the second week of spring to the number of units for teachers and administrators. Is that math written out somewhere that I can review later? Because like I don't think that it's
That
gonna
is.
be okay.
You can
send
look
me that
for.
by any
I will
chance?
try and find you that PDF.
Okay,
Because
because
it's on
never
the
made sense.
Alabama archives. But yeah,
Okay,
It's-
Anita, if you'll make note of that, Alabama archives and the weird math problem, because people have tried to explain it and it just doesn't make sense. And like that's where even other states are saying, hey, this is not the way you should be doing this. Like this is not how you should allocate funds. And that, man, the research paper I found made the most sense so far, but I still, it was a research paper, so it was a bit above my head for what I was trying to gather. I'll say that.
right.
Cool.
Here, I will, because I found where
Oh, you found it quickly.
And
Cool.
the chat bar here,
It helps when you know what you're looking for.
yeah, I put it in the FOSS meetings chat bar for the. You can then download the PDF.
Yep. I am opening that in the new tab.
But it will have allocations for different units, but they're never enough.
Yeah.
And there's really nothing for paraprofessionals, which I was saying, if you need teachers to teach, and I have to spend my time, and I only get 50 minutes at most a day, elementary school teachers get like 30.
Yeah.
So they plan math, language arts, reading, writing, social studies, science, and then a music and art class thing for 30 minutes once a week, and computer once a week for 30 minutes. And they do all that, but they only got 30 minutes for their kids in PE. They're rock stars.
Yeah.
There's no way, none, I could do that.
Yeah.
My brain does not work that enough. But at a secondary level, if I assign a social studies test, and yes, 30 questions are multiple choice, that's quick to grade. But then I have to give 2 essay questions. If you have paraprofessionals who could then appropriately grade, because you give a rubric, what you're looking for, these key facts are then that thing, they can go through and finish grading. That saves teachers so much time. Right. Or these kids didn't understand this and they're struggling with this. Pull them with a paraprofessional to the side. They work just to remediate for that short basic skill under the teacher's watch. That allows for differentiated instructions, which is massive. That allows for kids who have ADHD to have additional time and someone just for them for like 20, 30 minutes in this class where they can focus. It's amazing. It frees up special ed teachers. They're no longer having to sit there and just spend a whole hour giving a test for 6 kids and ignore their other 14 or so in other classrooms because they're stuck giving the test. You can have the paraprofessional with the door open and a teacher looking through, and now they're watched giving this test and reading it aloud, doing these accommodations for these kids. They're freed up to do other stuff.
So you mentioned the one-on-one kind of assisting and helping kids catch up, and that it triggered a thought, and I'm not sure, I don't remember if it was in your list or not offhand, but individual education plans. I've had several people mention that effectively that should be done for every kid, and like my understanding is that would be great. The problem is probably funding again, because you have to have somebody to not only come up with the plan, but also to help the student on an individual level actually progress. But what are your thoughts, and do you have any input on individual education plans and how lacking we are there as a state as a whole?
As a whole, you have a lot of teachers that the special ed teacher tries to come up with an individualized plan, but they use a lot of the same accommodations for everybody. So it's easier on the general ed teacher who might have, let's say, 150 kids. Well, if they are teaching that, 20 of them have an individualized education plan, they've got to make certain those are done in their classrooms. You've got kids who have a 504 plan. Those are kids that might have dyslexia or have mild to moderate ADHD, and it's not significant, but they need 1 or 2 accommodations. Well, they have got to keep up with those, and they're separate. Or if a kid's got health plans because they're diabetic, are they prone to UTIs? Do they have spina bifida and just some basic mobility issues? That's another healthcare. That's another plan these gen ed teachers have. So a lot of SPED teachers, and I say SPED, just short for special ed, make these plans that's easy for the general ed teacher to use, but might not always be truly individualized. And then, because if they do, then they get pushed back. And they might be able to keep track of 20 kids, but they can't keep track of all 20 kids that way when they're going through 5 or 6 other classrooms every day, plus their own, and make certain it's all done. So best practice is not always possible with a lot of special ed plans like that.
Yeah.
And then teachers also have to keep track of individualized English learning or language education plans for your EL students. And most teachers have no clue even how to read those. They get it, cool, great, put it in a filing cabinet, and then hope that child has made some progress because they have no clue what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, we've got now 3 programs that deal with English language learners, but they're all master levels. So if you're not going for your master's, you don't even get a class in it because it's not state required for your get a teaching certificate.
Gotcha.
You're required to have a survey for special ed students, but nothing for EL students. And then,
so if we were to, again, budget notwithstanding, because that is the root of a lot of the problems. At least, if you disagree, feel free to let me know. But it sounds like that's the root of a lot of problems is budget,
right.
Whether not enough in the first place or not distributed correctly throughout the state. Pick a direction, but generally, the people I've been talking to agree that budget is a problem. So knowing that is something we're trying to address, to make better use of IEPs, is that a paraprofessional allocation, or is that something where a paraprofessional could help not write them but help maintain or help
paraprofessionals help maintain them.
Yeah, so like we have, and again, that's
right.
This is my my naivety showing out, but you've got somebody who writes the plans, and that you don't necessarily need one of those people per student, right? You need one per however many, but you need a lot more. You need a much lower ratio of, let's say, paraprofessionals per student to help implement those plans. Correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. Like, if I wanted to have a good help for it, I would have, as a special ed teacher, one paraprofessional for every 5 or 6 special ed students, because that paraprofessional can then go into a classroom I'm not in to help co-teach and help those children out, or at least be an inclusion setting. Now, I won't say co-teach because they're not actual teachers legally, but they would be able to work with them in a small group and decide, well, I'm co-teaching in another classroom. Classes change, and then we might have some of those kids go to PE. Well, they probably don't need help reading and math in PE.
Right.
I don't know a lot of PE classrooms. They're doing a lot of math.
And you got to keep score, right? You got to keep score. Yeah. So playing dodgeball, how many kids did you? Well, I don't know. Do they play dodgeball in public schools anymore?
Some
still do it. Okay.
They do.
We called it war ball.
Yeah. If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. So.
But then you can move around that way.
Yeah.
But like I said, we're just not wanting to put the funds in action. And then your schools that have more money, like Hoover City Schools, Esteta City Schools, Mountain Brook City Schools. I think it's Huntsville City Schools has a bunch of money. Not Mobile City, maybe.
Not Mobile generally. Yeah. They're okay, but it depends on the school you go to.
Yeah. But like I'm used to the Birmingham metro area, so I can speak to that. It's where I grew up.
You can speak to that. That's fine.
So those systems can do more because they've got that local fund source, and they've got where the city's willing to sit there and be like, okay, the school's short $1 million. Well, in our city budget, we'll budget $1 million to the schools and just shift it over, and the schools get it. And so they can do a whole lot more than these poor rural county schools can ever do.
Yeah.
Even some of the city schools out there, like Selma City, has no money. The area around Selma has no money, but that's for totally different reasons.
Yeah.
But so if we found a better way to allocate funds across the state, or even just had additional supplies by making places like all of these timber farmers who own hundreds and hundreds of acres or thousands of acres and pay nothing. Looking at you, Kate Ivey, specifically.
I want, and this is not an excuse for her, but I believe that's one of the weird constitutional things where we have a set rate that you pay in taxes per acre, and it's literally in the Constitution. Like it's like, hey, it's $100 an acre.
Yeah,
and
it's
like,
not even that much.
Yeah. Oh well, whatever the amount is, it's not enough, but it's literally it's written into the Constitution. So you know how we fix that? For everybody who's paying attention, Mike, you probably know. But the way we fix that, the legislatures have to write something first, agree, and then get us to vote on it. So like, it's not happening.
It's not.
It would be nice, but that ain't happening.
But yeah, like we have to be willing to stop being. We want to have one of the lowest tax basis in the nation, which is what Alabama can claim
being
as its great claim to claim. Number one, as some people might find positive. But find a funding source that people are willing to do. And a lot of education's funding source is regressive because it comes from sales tax.
Right.
So the poorer families are taxed more for what they spend percentage-wise of their income to fund schools that they may or may not get that funding for.
Yeah, that's in that it's not sales tax, but people continually bring up the lottery, and my pushback is that affects poor people more, and that's who we're trying to help. So like, no, if they pass, if the legislature passes a lottery bill and there's public support behind it, like we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not pushing for a lottery, by like nowhere near.
But like the state, like
somebody made a comment real quick. I know we're pushing on time, so I want to. They put in a comment. So Keith says, "You got a multi-billion education budget that was passed by legislature. How can any school district be without money or operating on an inadequate budget with an appropriation at large?"
Because a lot of those appropriations that are at large require them to say, "We want to buy a new AC unit for this school. We've got to put out a bid call that takes 6 months." That funds then have to be set aside, and that might be $2 million, but we've got to set that $2 million aside and not touch it. And then it might take a year or 2 years before we're able to spend it.
So that appropriated money can't be used for staffing and things like that?
Right. A lot of schools started using some of the ESSRA money, so the COVID funds that the state got, some of them to fund for program use, some funded a few extra teachers for the past 3 years. But they started looking long-term, like some did, where they needed to upgrade the pipes in their schools for water access and sewer access, air conditioning units, upgraded air conditioning in the gym, and air filters. Schools are required to bid out each of those parts individually. So that fund is then held up, which is why schools have till I think end of next school year, the one that's coming up, to have them bid out and start paying for it, because it takes so much longer than you just calling up the plumber and be like, "Hey, I need you to come fix the pipe in my house."
Right.
So there are rules and regulations schools have to follow that slow the spending of money. But most of the funding that schools have gotten over the past 3 years with these big budgets, it's not going to last. Like, it's over as of last school year. There's no extra federal funds coming in. If we end up going into recession, all of that money's gone, because those big budgets shrink because there's less tax base.
Gotcha. Well,
because so much of it's regressive.
Yeah. So it is 8 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of your time. We started a little bit late, so if you want to wrap it up with any kind of final thoughts or things that we should look into that we didn't get to, because we've got somebody taking notes in the background, thankfully.
Yeah.
But
the other one I say that we really didn't touch when we talked about teacher units or teachers' bodies in the building, we do need to try and have a minimum of at least one EL teacher per building. Because even if you have one kid, and I know it sounds massively expensive when it's down to one kid, but there's some schools that have like one or two kids. Those kids get left behind the whole way through.
Yeah.
And then they never catch up because they never got that language basis. Or
Yeah.
you got schools like have 40 or 50 of these kids, and that's more, they're all throughout different levels. That's more than one person can effectively do and help out, because a lot of times they're then asked to remediate on this, help them with their homework here, you need to help them with this test, you need to, it's everything but teach them language. So there needs to be at least one in every building, and have a set ratio for a divisor. For every 20 EL kids, that's a EL teacher, period. That might mean you still get an extra general ed unit, but you have one EL teacher. Same as you need at least one special ed teacher for like 20 special ed students. And if we could fund it, it'd be great. You have 22 kids. Well, if we said 1 per 20, that's 2 teachers.
You round up. Yeah.
Round up
You don't
always.
round down.
Yeah.
There's a ratio for a reason. So as soon as you cross the ratio, you should be increasing, not overburdening the one teacher that's there.
Yeah. And if you always round up, then you get the divisors to be like the ratios they're hoping for.
Right. The ones they're actually hoping for, not the
Yes.
the ratio they pitch is the maximum. That is like, that's the red line in your car's RPM. It's like, yeah, like don't go any higher. Like don't sit there. Like don't shift. Go to the next gear. Like you gotta bring it down. You shouldn't sit there the whole time. Yeah, no.
And we're just always shifting to that red and revving up too high.
Yeah.
But that's what causes some of that burnout.
Yep.
And
That's
it's
why we
not
keep
the
blowing
kids.
gaskets.
Okay. It's never the kid. Well, it's almost never the kids. It's always the paperwork, the extra rules, regulations you have to follow, the parents, the culture around the building, what you hear every day. I don't even have to think about it. I can walk through stores and I can hear people complaining about lazy immigrants that don't speak English, but then they're complaining there's no jobs. And I'm like, well, if they're taking your jobs, or they're taking your jobs with being lazy, it's one or the other. They can't do both.
Yeah.
So teachers get that same story on them everywhere they go.
Yeah. Keith has one more question, and if you want to answer, you can, and then we'll wrap it up and head out.
All right.
Lowering standards for individuals to become teachers will lowering standards for individuals to become a teacher benefit education in the state? It's the response to the teacher shortage currently.
Yeah. Personally, when you're looking for the difference of what I try to find what some of those standard differences were. Some of those tests, it's the difference of getting out of the 120 questions, you had to get like 95 correct to be a teacher. When they went to lower that standard number, some of those, instead of 95, it's now 93.
Gotcha.
So it's finding like 1 or 2 extra questions to be wrong. I personally, I've taken plenty of those tests before. Like I know you can pass them.
Okay.
I know people can, but I also know there are people who stress so bad. Like there needs to be some sort of standard. Either you take the praxis tests, or now you also have teachers going through college that have to take an educational teacher proficiency portfolio they make, which is like EdTEP, is what it's abbreviated as. I never had to do that when I was graduating, because I graduated way back before that ever started. But that's done while you're doing your student teaching, and that's like 120 hours of work.
Okay.
So if you're already asking someone to do 120 hours, it needs you to be, you've passed that with good enough proficiency to me, or
take the test.
Or take the test for that content.
Gotcha.
And that content can then be at a lower percentage, or you don't ever do that EdTEP stuff and you have it where it's at.
So not necessarily lowering the score though, because it's you don't think that that's an unreasonable, at least from your experience, it's not an unreasonable test to take.
Some of those are not unreasonable. The issue I've seen, like I'll tell you, the deaf education test, when they were first looking at the state, that test is in like early 2000s was pointless, because you can't, it was all multiple choice, and they didn't give you enough information to properly answer it. So we were in a classroom taking it, and you could kind of see everyone be like it was asking which theory would be best for this, and depending on your personal viewpoint, you might have a theory. You've got your teachers at School for the Deaf that will be all, you need to let them use manual communication. You need to be culturally aware. You got people who are adamant for cochlear implants, they need to talk. And they're two separate sides, and they're just one or the other. So you had no clue.
Gotcha.
So unless they fix that test, and I think they fixed a good chunk of that now. So that's it. It's been,
It's been a while since you've
yeah,
had to take
been a
it.
while.
Fair
So
enough.
like,
Okay. Well,
Probably.
I will say
Yeah.
this. If anybody has taken the test more recently or is more acquainted with that test, I would love to hear from you so that I can understand more about that test and how you feel as a professional in the industry. Because, what I feel about that test isn't as important as those who are in the profession and understand what that test actually means. So I'd love to get some feedback on that. I think we will wrap it up here. Michael, I appreciate you taking some time. If you ever want to jump in, and everybody is welcome in these meetings, but if you ever want to jump in and bring some more education policy ideas, we have this meeting every Tuesday at 7. We are trying to set the agenda ahead of time more frequently. So if you want to do it, give us a date, and we'd be happy to have you back on.
no problem.
Awesome.
You're more than welcome.
Perfect. All right, everybody else, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, have a good rest of the night. Keith, I'm looking forward to our meeting on the 25th. I'm going to be on Keith's show talking education, a few other subjects. So, Michael, I appreciate your time tonight. Keith, see you then. Everybody else, have a great night, and we will see you Saturday from 9 to 10 for our strategy / general campaign operations meeting, and then the field operations are